Greetings, fam. Let's talk reparations. My name is Claude Sinclair. I'm an attorney, California attorney, 25 years, and a licensed minister, 15 years. Reparations is just a matter of negotiation. But in order to negotiate, you have to negotiate from a position of strength and not weakness. So we have to become strong. So let's talk about creating wealth, which requires personal responsibility and a complete overhaul of ourselves and children and the mental barriers to wealth creation that we may or may not have. The obstacles on the road to personal responsibility is nothing but a call to adventure. But this cause requires strength and competence on your part, which gives you the power to succeed. Now, as you will see in one of my true stories to follow, if you do not allow your children to have a sense of necessity in their lives, they will grow up to be incompetent and end up taking shortcuts in life without ever learning patience and discipline, which builds the character and competence they need to survive and thrive on their own. This is what my program is all about, reinstilling patience, discipline, and character. That competence which produces what? Purpose. The instructions from your parents that you may have refused to listen to as a child, and many of you are now paying for that right now. But what about those of you who never got any instruction at all and are looking for it now? There may be those of you who have been broken and in need of repair of some sort. Or maybe you just want to become a better person of substance, but no matter what brought you here, let me help in my own way, because there is one thing I know how to do. I know how to produce champions, even when you believe the odds are against you. You just need to find within yourself that necessity to grow and improve each and every day. You are blessed with the breath of life given to you as a gift at your creation, and that should not be wasted. Free will gives us the ability to make choices, and choosing to remain unprepared and unable to excel in a tough world is a choice. But there is something inside of you that compels you to succeed, and I know it. And it wants you, and you want to succeed and be successful. So you ask, what drives this desire of free will to become successful and to make something out of your life? You want to tap into that. As a child, it comes from your environment and hopefully your parents who constantly bombarded you with advice to study hard and be the best at whatever you choose to do in life. However, what you see, learn, and experience while growing up may not match up with the rest of competitive society. And if you don't get this foundation while growing up by being steadfast and learning to finish what you started, you will be at a disadvantage, and especially when you are under the illusion that you can fake it until you make it, harming others along the way, which causes you to cut corners, confusing material gain with success. Years later, the Fed comes knocking at your door and demanding you give back all your ill-gotten gains with a prison sentence to boot. I have a saying that all money is not good money. This is why sometimes you may get away with it, making money by any means necessary in the short term. But having honesty and integrity is a long-term proposition that is good for your soul. If your parents gave you everything and you only experienced the end result and never learned what went into what you were being freely given, all you know is that this is what I want and you got it. This is being spoiled and growing up with a sense of entitlement. For example, a child growing up with his or her basic needs being met with food, clothing, and shelter. The basic necessities of life plus a lot more. You tell your parents, I'm not going to be like you and working my whole life away at a job, yet failing to realize the amazing effort and brilliance it took your parents to raise children and put a roof over their head. But the child instead decides to go out and sell drugs, trying to take a shortcut, ending up in prison or in the early grave. Even though the parent was successful, they never instilled in their child necessity. The necessity of hard work to survive. So as adults, these children grab at scams and get rich quick gimmicks that don't make sense because they were never allowed or shown how to develop the need to work hard for what you need in life for yourself and their family. So, their free will has been hampered and is not driven by the necessity to succeed and prosper, which requires effort, energy, and enthusiasm to succeed because they never had to. Then there are those of you who never had a chance because there was no one around to help you to see life from a different perspective. All they know is gangbanging and robbing others to get what they needed. And you also need the right mentor to show you how to break these bad habits and rebuild new habits, and how to train your children along the way to be successful and not have to fake it while looking good on the inside, while looking good on the outside, but an empty vessel on the inside. In order to do something different in life and be better than your hardworking parents, you must be a better version of them, but not less than your parents. You still need their foundation of necessity so you can build upon where they left off, taking the good and learning from the bad. So let's learn to be team players, able to learn and grow from the experience of others. For example, in my life, my mother instilled in me to be the best at whatever I chose to do in my life, although she wasn't perfect. But I never knew my sperm donor father, and when I finally reached out to the man who my mother said was my father, he denied it because he had a wife and children already. However, I made a commitment not to let this become a generational curse in my life. So I made sure that I was there at the birth of each of my children and in their lives, and an active presence in their life. I made a promise to myself that no matter how difficult and unreasonable the obstacles their mothers would put in my way because they lost their way, I would never let that affect the relationship with my children. As a result, in spite of everything, I gave them stability and the substance as they grew up to be healthy-minded adults. Why do I say this? After they became adults and able to think for themselves, they told me so themselves, each one by one. The curse stopped with me. How can a man abandon his children if he knows they exist? Let me say this before I get started, my disclaimer. I realize that there are a large number of people who are doing quite well and take good care of their kids. But your children are the weak link and must be trained to prosper and then receive their inheritance. Because children who are weak grow up to be adults that are weak. We're doing a horrible job at training and passing wealth to the next generations. Then there are those of us who don't have a clue about being a parent or the need to learn how to create and accumulate wealth. The objective here is to close the wealth gap in order to eradicate poverty and despair within our communities. This discussion applies to any family striving to end their generational curses of abandonment and struggling to survive, which for purposes of convenience we will refer to as a poverty mindset or the poor use of their free will. You see, many people are not team players and operate as selfish individuals who feel no loyalty to anyone and only stick around as financial predators because they lack a value system and have been consumed by materialism of life and lack spiritual balance. Greed is a European construct, getting by at the expense of others by any means necessary, which includes killing, stealing, and destroying others so you can live your life. That's not a good look. This behavior is toxic and also includes compulsive liars who learn this behavior many times from their parents at a very young age. Let's talk about community investment. And on the flip side, as an investment rule of thumb, you don't put good money on a bad investment. Heard people say, well, nobody helps us. Nobody looks back and try to pull us up. That's not true. But first you have to start with yourself. At this point, most individuals and communities are a bad investment. So we have a double conundrum. Mister, could you define conundrum? Of course. But normally I would tell my students to look it up. But conundrum is defined as a confusing and difficult problem or question. This talk is designed to unravel this difficulty, and as always, I propose to you an obvious solution which requires action, that requires using your free will, which is a choice that comes from your necessity to succeed, which is determined by what motivates you. Listen, people are motivated by wealth, power, greed, and the belief in new beginnings. And although we seek peace, love, prosperity, and a life after death, life is tragic, complex, and difficult. So how do we prepare ourselves and loved ones for such a life journey? Let's get started. I'll break this discussion into 3 areas and use the Black community as an example of what needs to be done. Of course, this talk could apply to any individual, culture, or community. Success doesn't care who you are, but only if you embrace her teachings. First, we'll talk about free will as a choice. Personal responsibility comes from the necessity to survive and prosper and not live in chaos based upon poor decision making. Then we'll talk about wealth creation versus deception. 3, I'm going to pose a scenario and ask you, if you were president, how would you raise the people out of poverty? And finally, I'll present the solution. Personal responsibility. Remember when Kanye West said slavery was a choice? Everybody just freaked out. Remember in the movie Django when Leonardo DiCaprio, who was the plantation owner, if you haven't seen Django, you need to check it out. And he discussed with another character, Django's bounty hunter partner in the movie, why the father of Samuel Jackson, who played DiCaprio's old and decrepit head slave, Leonardo asked a rhetorical question to the bounty hunter. I wonder why, in his southern drawl, I wonder why Samuel Jackson's daddy did not cut the throat of his father when shaving his daddy for all those years. DiCaprio said if it were him, he would have cut his throat without hesitation. At dinner, he showed everyone a Negro skull. The reason of the Negro brain, he said, was different than other races. He retorted that Negroes have a docile region in the lower brain. He pointed to the lower portion of the brain. He said, "This is not the first," and I looked at that. I said, "This is not the first time I heard this." I saw an Arab slave holder on YouTube one day who said that blacks are like animals whose spirit can be broken to accept their subservient condition. Maybe being a slave is not a choice, after all. There are 3 forms of entitlement in most societies which destroys free will to act in their best interests. When their spirit is broken and then they get these forms of an entitlement. I call it the anthem of gimme. Give me a job and feed me, and what have you done for me lately? Instead of saying, show me how to make my own money, or how can we learn to work together so we can make even more money? What happens when you're fired from your job, laid off, or just can't take it anymore? What happens? Then there is the anthem for the primal undeveloped mind, which is to kill, steal, and destroy, and take to others so you may have. This is another form of entitlement for the primal mind. There's another form that I laid out, having an entitlement mindset for being provided welfare, jobs, and accepting the miseducation of our children. We want somebody else to educate our children. Everyone needs help at one time or another, and we are fortunate for this. But who makes such help a generational curse?